Has that come up?
And yes, that has come up. Brilliant. So obviously the first slide is just to make sure that everybody's in the right session. If you weren't here for Intelligent London, then you're in the wrong room, but stay anyway because it's going to be delightful. I promise. I absolutely promise you. So just a very quick overview of what this session will entail. Just a short introduction and overview from me, and then Steve and Phil are going to take you through what Intelligent London is and actually give you a really good demonstration of what Intelligent London can do, hopefully, for you. Feedback and questions opportunity, obviously, at the end of the session. But if while Steve and Phil are actually presenting, if anything does come up where you're really stuck, if you use the chat, pop something in the chat, then we can make sure that we pick that up at the end, or if we need to pick it up while Steve and Phil are actually talking, then we can do that too. So that'll be really good. So the bulk of this session is actually walking you through Intelligent London and then giving you the opportunity to give us some feedback and ask some questions. So on to a little bit of an overview and background. So why did we create Intelligent London? So we started this piece of work many years ago, and it was the germ of the idea actually started in about 2010, and we started working on it around 2011. We were told by the people that we were working with in the boroughs that there was no single place to find all the information that people were looking for, particularly and specifically around the 14 to 19 part of the education world, which is basically the kind of landing point for some of the biggest transitions in education. So we wanted to find a solution for that, and we've kept that kind of financial commitment going to make sure that we can keep that solution up and running. We wanted to make sure that we could provide somewhere where both local authority colleagues, but also stakeholders, could rapidly and easily access data to help them understand what their role is in supporting young people to be successful. We recognise that this tool was very much designed around the notion that there is no single stakeholder that has some kind of magic responsibility for helping young people be successful. Many stakeholders are involved. So obviously Mary's here from the Association of Colleges, in addition to the fact that we've got local authority colleagues here. So this is genuinely a shared endeavour. We also wanted to make sure that we created a tool that was useful to many individuals. I think it's important to acknowledge that at the point at which we were designing this, we were starting to see some teams in boroughs being really hollowed out. Austerity was really starting to bite in. And we could also see that some of the teams in boroughs where they used to have quite large support around analysis, for example, was really being denuded. So we wanted to provide a tool that if somebody puts their hand up and says, I can't do data analysis for any amount of money at all, I just need the stats, that they can go to this and they can get the stats, right through to the data analysis team that is a lot smaller now, but they can actually go to a website, they can pull off the raw data and actually do their analysis, but they know where to go. So we wanted to create a tool that could help as many people as possible. We also wanted to make it useful and interesting. So it's not just about providing the data, it's helping you with giving you different visualizations that you can pull off, pop into reports, but more than that, we all use data differently. Some of us could not be happier if we've got a 14-tabbed workbook from Excel in front of us, and other people would rather, do something else. They just want a graph, or they want a pie chart, or they want something else. So we wanted to make it as useful as possible, taking into account very different audiences. And I feel we genuinely have pulled that off. That was the royal we. That very much is the brilliant work of Mime Consulting. If you can just pop to the next slide, please, Steve. Thank you. I'm not going to go into what those little tab headings mean, because that's Steve and Phil will be taking you through the actual product. But what I did want to just point out to you was this is arguably quite a niche tool, quite a niche website. It's for predominantly London stakeholders, but it's really well used. And just a quick point to make here, the figures that you can see on this page, we use Google Analytics, but when we use Tableau Analytics, so that's the kind of creative platform that the site sits on, it increases those usage figures by as much as 60%. So it's really well used, but more than that, it's regularly well used as well. So we're pleased about that. We know that people use it. We know that people can get a lot of intelligence from it. There is one other factor that sat behind the creation of Intelligent London, and that's about mature local government. One of the things that we often see happen when GCSE results, when A-level results come out, when NEET figures come out, is somebody else grabs hold of them and creates a league table and takes a pop at one of the boroughs. It just happens. So actually, in terms of having a mature approach to this, we kind of wanted to say, it's fine. The data's there, it's in the public domain. The important bit is how we use it. It's not about creating league tables. It's about how we use management information to make informed management decisions. And that was a significant part of the creation of Intelligent London. Enough of the boring science and background. Now you can have the really interesting science from Steve and Phil, and they're going to walk you through. Over to you, Steve. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Yolande, and morning, everybody. So yeah, as Yolande was going to start off by giving you a really kind of high-level overview of what's included in the system, and then what we're going to do is step through some sort of worked examples where we'll take you through something from our perspective and give you a few minutes. As we're all sitting on computers today, you'll be able to spend a little bit of time playing around with it, and also obviously that gives you an opportunity to ask us any questions when you're going through doing that. So just to start on the data sources side of things, so as Yolan's already mentioned, this is specifically a 14 to 19 tool, so the data sources you'll see there around secondary and post 16, but that includes things like what happens after after statutory schooling. It includes a bit of demographic context as well. It's updated normally 4 times a year, and the reason we do it like that is because of when the DfE releases the data. So most of the data we use in this tool is published by the DfE. There are a few other exceptions that the Office of National Statistics produce, but mostly we're saying, okay, this data has been released. People may be familiar with some things like Explore Education Statistics, the new DfE website. It can be quite hard to access some of the data from there. So what we're doing is pulling it all together into one format. So there's lots of different sources of information. We're pulling it into a standardized format and visualizing it in the same way across all the different data sets. So very loosely, we've got 4 chunks of data that we update. So there's the autumn release, which would be Key Stage 4 and 5 attainment, and also destinations. We've got learning landscape. We'll come on to that later on, what that means, but it's basically about the schools and the provision that's in a local area. One of the important things to know about this, obviously this year and the previous year, actually, you may have noticed they've been a bit strange. From a data point of view, it's created certain challenges, but what's been interesting is actually the DfE have still largely released a lot of the local authority level data that they would always do. So interesting, so we've still got Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 data released at the local authority level. Obviously, people know, this isn't a debate about grade inflation for today, but people know that there is certain background context that people need to understand, but the data is still in there. We've been able to use that this year, and we'll update it again when the 2021 data is out. So normally you would get revised versions, so you get provisional versions earlier in the autumn term, and then revised data later on. In a normal year, so this is the big difference, as people will be aware of this year, then the DfE have decided not to publish any school level data for 2020 and 2021 because of they don't want it to be used for accountability purposes. So although these children are still in the system, and we need to understand the local authority picture in terms of the things like disadvantaged cohort, or there might be particular cohorts we're interested in looking at, we're not able to present that at a school level, and I think that's the right thing. Obviously, when that does come back in, touch wood, next year, then that data will continue to be updated. In the spring, we have various other data sets, so secondary absence data. In the coming spring, we will hopefully be getting some of the 2021 census data set. So that's obviously a fantastic resource. We don't know the exact timing of when they'll release. They generally stagger the release of census data, but as we get data that's released from the 2021 census, as in the national census, we'll be putting that into the tool as it becomes available. There's a key indicator around level of achievement by age 19, so that's the achievement of level 2 and level 3. The stuff we've got over here that is more traditional school and college outcome measures, but the local authority data on basically what proportion of our cohort are ready for that next level by age 19, that comes down. That's a really important data set. And then there's more updates of the learning landscape and provider performance. And then finally, in the summer, there are 3 more data sets that get released. So there's the January school census. So that's already been released for 2021, an analysis of that. And then the NEET and participation data, and then exclusions. So there have historically been other data sets that aren't being updated as frequently by the DfE, so I haven't put them on here, but this gives you the main sense of when things are available. Broadly, that the key data sets we will get out very, very soon after they're released by the DfE. So Key Stage 4 often is released on a Thursday, and normally we'll have updated Intelligent London and cleaned it all up by the Friday. Some of the other data sets that are slightly less time pressured might take a couple of weeks until they get released, but those really key data sets what we generally get out as soon as they're released, and you'll get a notification from Yolan's team that comes out on the email distribution list to notify you of that. If you ever go to the actual website, the homepage also tells you what data has been updated recently. 2 other bits of kind of context. It is all public data. This is kind of by definition, we're not going to local authorities and asking for their own data. It's only stuff that's released into the public domain. The reason we do that is so that we know things are official, they're consistent, and it allows you to benchmark. So in particular, what we're talking about with benchmarking, as well as looking at comparisons, you can see if you're working for a local authority, what that local authority's position is essentially, how it compares to your near neighbours, and you can choose what comparison groups you use for that. So just bear in mind with things like NEET, for example, there is a time delay before the DfE publish it, so there'll be a short window where you may have more up-to-date data than has been released and cleaned up by the DfE. So just bear that in mind in a few cases. And another point about data sources is that each section will show you where that data comes from. So if you actually want to see the official source and then the full, the 20-page methodology documents from the DfE, you're very welcome to click on those links and find and read more. In terms of some other bits of information, you just might be aware. So some of these will be notified when you get the email briefing from the Yolan's team. There are other supporting bits of information we often release around some of these things. One of them actually is a really big report. A lot of people are familiar with. We did a launch event for this a little while ago. So the post-16 trajectories report. Some of the messages around that, looking at we delve into a lot of detail on that one. That uses the National Pupil Database to really explore pupil characteristics and pathways through post-16 education. We've also done a local authority level infographic for each London local authority. So, and if you haven't, we did send those out. They're free things that we added out, sent out to every local authority. If you haven't received one and you are working in a local authority, please do let us know. And then periodically, what we'll do to again provide a bit of more colour behind some of these data sets. So obviously the data is being released, and that's great. But sometimes what we're trying to say, well, what's the new message that's coming out of this? So frequently we'll be putting on the Mine website some blog posts. So we might release, the Key Stage 4. Or data might be released, and then we will release a tool on the Mine website that goes into even more detail than what's available in Intelligent London. So you'll be notified about those as well. So just bear in mind there might be some additional resources, and these slides can be shared afterwards, so you can link to those if you want. Right. So that's the background. I'm now going to attempt to well, shortly I will flip screens. Hopefully, let's see how smoothly this works. And hopefully this will load up. I think I've got a few nods. Mary's nodding so they can see my new screen. So this is the homepage of Intelligent London. You'll recognise these 4 icons from the slide that Yolan brought up before. So very broadly, obviously, it explains underneath what each one of those is about, and then you can also hover over them to get a little bit more information. But very broadly speaking, these 2 reports are local authority level, largely data. with regional comparisons, and the ones on the right hand side are a more detailed individual school level data. And we kind of present it like this with those arrows, because we're kind of saying, look, the starting point to get the high level picture, you'd probably start over here. The local overview is essentially a curated set of indicators, so it doesn't look at everything that's available on Intelligent London, but it's a nicely formatted, very visual PDF that if you want a snapshot of either your local authority, or if you're working with a new local authority, or maybe you operate across a lot of different local authorities, nice way of getting oversight of what the headline picture is for a particular local authority. And then you might want to drill down into more detail under Borough Insight, which Phil's going to demo later, and that will give you a lot more ability to do things like, well, okay, I work in Wandsworth, how does that compare to Lambeth, and that be, or Southwark, or our other near neighbours, because that gives me really useful context, and it might help me identify some really good performance somewhere in a particular local authority. I want to go and have a conversation with that local authority about what's going on. So essentially what Borough Insight's doing is giving you the power to drill down and really unpick some of the messages that are coming out from the local overview section. There's loads of extra data in there. There's lots of different indicators. You can go back many years in some cases and present things on line charts. You can choose to visualize things in maps. So there's a lot of flexibility and power within there. The learning landscape, as I mentioned before, it's basically a map of provision in London. So it's basically allows you to visualize this dot map in different ways. And say Phil will show you that later on. Drill down and pull out extra information for individual institutions. And then the final one is what we call provider performance. We can see we were trying to do a little bit of alliteration on these titles. We only managed 2 out of 4. But provider performance would normally be the performance table data and things like destinations at a provider level. And allows you to again visualize those in different ways. Final point, as I mentioned before, you've got these this update here, which will tell you when what the latest data that's been released on the website is, and in some cases it'll tell you that the local overviews have been updated as well. So these 4 options here, just so you're aware, are exactly the same as the 4 options across the top. Doesn't take you anywhere different. It's just 2 different ways of navigating. There are a few FAQs over here, but really all you need to know in terms of navigation are these 4 sections across the middle. So I'm going to start off by looking at the local overview. My internet's not being particularly snappy today, but the first thing you get when you look at the local overview is, as you can see, a hopefully familiar map of London. And then what you can do, you can hover over each of the local authorities, and when I get to the one I want, you just click it, and then it gives you the option to download it. There is also an overall London summary if you're interested in that. If you're not looking at a specific local authority, you can get the overall London picture as well, which will be on that button. But for the purposes of today's demonstration, I'm going to look at the Wandsworth report. I don't know if there's anyone else here from Wandsworth today, but I do a lot of work there, so I think I'm fairly safe territory bringing that up. So as I say, the local overview is a formatted PDF. It has a little bit of an introduction, some contents. Every time you open it, it will tell you the latest data that's been released. So as I say, normally these will be updated about 4 times a year, and it will tell you the last new data that's been included. This page, which I'm going to touch on briefly, but not in loads of detail, is just there so you can, because a lot of the data is presented in a particular way in the dashboard. This page essentially tells you how to interpret it. So very broadly, you normally will have 4 years of data. So in this case, we've got 4 years of Wandsworth data. You've got the London average, which is that number in grey. And just bear in mind that because it's in grey, what it's basically telling you is that comparison is for 2020. It sort of says, okay, that's, sorry, beg your pardon, 2021. So that the grey number is just clarifying which numbers are being compared. So the 2021 data here is compared to the London average here. It shows the London rank, so that would often be out of 32 London boroughs. In this case, it's 19th out of 32. And then you get the difference. This little bar chart shows you the percentage point difference. So because Wandsworth's performance is 44.2 for this measure, and it's 41.4% in London, it's showing, that's just showing the difference. And because London's performance is better, sorry, Wandsworth's performance is better, it's showing as a green bar. So there's a lot of color coding in this, which is trying to help people kind of quickly spot interesting differences. So you get that London picture for the latest year, and then on the right hand side you get 4 years of England data, so you can see how the trend differs. So again, you get a a Wandsworth rank compared with the whole of England. So in this case, it's 131st, and then there's difference bar again. So the difference between 45.9 and 44 is shown there. These little stacked, these little bars
Steve,
at the end.
Sorry to interrupt. Folks, for those of you who just, if the screen is small, if you go onto your 3 little dots and then click focus, it will actually close down the panel of other participants and make the screen a bit bigger for you. Sorry, Steve. Thank you.
That hopefully this will make it bigger as well now. So beg your pardon. Yes, that should be a little bit bigger on screen as well.
Brilliant.
So yeah, so these, it's probably easier if I show you this on the actual charts, but what these are showing is if you're constantly trending above the national average or not. So if for this local authority it was a bit below, then it was a bit above, so it went from red to green back to red. But what you'll often find is you'll have a pattern which is, you know, green, 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 or red, 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 red. So what it's really telling you is how, you know, is this latest year an outlier, or had consistent pattern which is different to the national trend. So I've just gone through that in terms of the performance indicators. It's worth noting that some indicators aren't really about performance, they're just about volume or size. And in those cases, we don't use green and red, we use different color coding, which I'll show you in a second. So that's the sort of the explanation of the pack. The first page is just a little bit of context, which gives a bit of information about the composition of schools, ethnic breakdown, and this, which is a deprivation map for your local authority, where the most deprived are in purple and the least deprived are in green. And then we get on to the kind of the more detailed performance and contextual data. So as I say, all of these pages are laid out in the way that I've just described, those the 4-year trends, the comparison to London, the comparison to England. So this is an interesting example here, where so in Wandsworth, the free school eligible population has gone from 14.3% to 23.3%. There's been various policy changes in that time. That's really interesting. But I can also see that the national trend has gone up, but actually the gap between Wandsworth and national has increased. So I don't know how clear that is on my screen, but those red bars are increasing over time. So it's trying to give me a really quick snapshot of where things are quite different and how they've been changing over time. So this first page is about pupil characteristics and a bit about behaviour. So it's got absence and exclusions for the secondary phase. Then we move on to the attainment section. So on this one, we've got Key Stage 4, headline measures, EBAC, things like the 4 main measures at Key Stage 5, so A-level, academic, technical and applied general. And then these really important measures, so we looked at these in the post-16 trajectories report as well. So the proportion that were qualified to level 2 by 19, looking at free school meal eligible and not free school meal eligible. As I say, some of these will be available in more detail in the Borough Insight section. So you can see for Wandsworth, actually, what's quite pleasant to see is that a lot of these patterns are green. So we can see a lot of them, Wandsworth constantly trending ahead of national average. Now, what people probably be aware of in this group is that London performance at Key Stage 4 is generally pretty good. So what we'll often see, most of these London packs, you'll see positive kind of green trends compared to the national averages. It's probably useful to think about your local authority performance compared to London averages as well, so you get that in there. So a typical pattern might be strong performance at Key Stage 2, Key Stage 4, often slightly less good performance at Key Stage 5, although again our post-16 trajectories report goes into a lot of detail on this, and without going off on a massive tangent, one of the big things around this is that in Wandsworth, in London and Wandsworth and most of the local authorities we do a lot of work with at mine, we can see that often kids will of a lower level will often be pushed into higher level courses. So basically there's more kids of a slightly lower level of prior attainment going on to Key Stage 5 courses, and that's one of the big drivers behind Key Stage 5 performance. But as I say, a lot more detail on that in the post-16 trajectories report. I'll just skip through a couple of other pages just so you get a sense of what else is in here. So you've got the destinations data. So this is showing whether people went after Key Stage 4, Key Stage 5 into college, school sixth form and so on, higher education. Participation data, so a little bit on apprenticeships, which is always a little bit disappointing how these trends are often going in a downward direction. Then the NEET and the participation data, and a little bit about cross-border movement. And at the end, we've got these data sources that I mentioned that you can go and see if you want to. So that is the local overview, a whistle-stop tour of the local overview. We're going to give you 5 minutes now to have a little play with the Intelligent London website. So hopefully, let's see if I can bring this back up. I'll just go back to the URL in case people missed that from before. So it's www.intelligentlondon.org.uk. So if you can go to that page, and assuming you're a local authority, obviously you can open up your local authority pack from the local overview page. If not, you could choose a particular local authority, or you could look at the London overview and just maybe have a as I say, a 5-minute look through, looking at areas of relative strengths and weaknesses, and maybe areas where performance is improving and where maybe performance has dropped, or maybe the pattern is just different to what's happened elsewhere in England. Would be useful to have a look at. So the main thing we want you to do here is just spend a little bit of time familiarising yourself with that report, and obviously asking us any questions. As I say, we'll come back in about 5 minutes, and please do feel to put any comments on the chat and let us know if you can't get on for any reason.
I've also just popped the link for the site into the chat as well.
So I'm just going to pick up one of the things Mary raised about the London level report. So let's see if I can go back. So when you go to the local overview page, you get all the different London boroughs. Sorry, it's just reloading, and then this download the overall London summary. So it's relatively well hidden. Download overall London summaries at this bottom right of the image here. It's obviously presented in a pretty similar way, but it doesn't have the local authority rank, obviously, but it's got the 4-year London data, which is actually quite useful because that's not available in the single local authority PDF, so you can get that 4-year trajectory as well if you want from there. Okay, maybe just another 30 seconds or so, then if there's no questions, I'll hand over to Phil. Okay, if there's no questions on that, then I will hand over. Phil, do you want to take control of the screen?
Yes. Has that done something?
You can see the website, yeah.
Okay, perfect. People can see the website. That's a good start. Right. Thank you very much, Steve, and good morning to everybody. Phil here from Mime. Right. So if the local overview that Steve just demonstrated was your kind of curated list of indicators and measures, you know, your summary, a thing you can print out, a thing you can refer to. We're going to take a look now at Borough Insight, which is the next blob along. And as Steve said, you know, there's a little bit of a kind of data journey here. And you may have discovered something of interest in your local overview that has prompted some more questions in your head about what might be happening and what might be driving some of that data. And maybe you'd like to explore the trend over time in a little bit more detail. And that's really what Borough Insight's about. So it's a kind of much more of a build your own tool. You know, the PDF local overview is a thing that we've set up for you, like for convenience, but maybe now you've got some more questions and you really want to dig into something in a little bit more detail. So lots more measures on here compared to what's in the local overview, lots more detail and a little bit more power as well. So across the top here, we've grouped things into domains of data. So we've got some context here in the landscape, some data on participation. So that's the neat and not known participation data, some employer views data here as well, vacancies and those sorts of things. Big selection of data on the outcomes tab around Key Stage 4, Key Stage 5, and those level 2 and 3 by 19 achievements. Again, focused on the 14 to 19 arena. And the final tab, we've got a lot of information on the destinations measures here as well. On each of the tabs, you'll see that there's a little show more button, and that hides a lot of extra indicators. So if we were to do that on any of the other tabs, we'd see loads of extra pieces of information come along, right? And really, what we want to do in the first instance is pick something that we're interested in, right? So we might be interested in some destinations after Key Stage 5, young people going to higher education, for example. And you can see here we've got the any, but as an overall percentage, but we've also got the groups for disadvantaged here as well. So the destinations of disadvantaged young people. And that was one of those blog pieces that Steve made reference to as the other resources, where we looked at that in a little bit more detail earlier on in the year. So what I would do is click the indicator that I'm interested in, and you'll see a little side panel appears here with a selection of different kind of visualization types, right? So we picked higher education institutions, the destinations, and what the system's now done is it's now loaded the data for that particular measure. And I can scroll down the web page, or I can use the side panel to scroll me down to one of the visualizations. And really, this is like a visualization builder tool. So the first one that we come across is the map, and this obviously should look relatively familiar to everyone. And we've got some information which we can see where it comes up on tooltips when we hover over things. So we were looking at Wandsworth before, and we can see their value in 2019 here is 61.1% of young people, puts them 17th out of the London local authorities. And as we hover over other local authorities, that tooltip information will change. And the same is true over here on the regions. So again, we can see the region data here. We can see London actually does very well in terms of the number of young people going to higher education, but we've got all the region comparator information over here, and this is something that we kind of picked up a little bit more in that post-16 trajectories report, where we were talking about the trajectories of young people after age 16. So there's options here around changing the year, so we could kind of go back and look at some historical data, and if we wanted to, we can kind of label the map with some information as well. And these sort of options are really good if you want to screenshot these visualizations and include them in your own analysis. So if you're including them in a pack of analysis, you can create a visualization of some sort and then take a screenshot of it, screen grab of it from the website, and include it in your own reports as well. So that's what that's there for. Further down the page, we can scroll down and see a bar chart. So as Yolan was saying, some people like to see things on maps, some people like to see things on bar charts, some people like a visualization that they can kind of control themselves. So again, with the bar chart here, we've got some options down the side. We can change the year, so we can go back and look at 2018, for example, the preceding year, and the visualization will update for us. We should see we've got a few local authorities ticked by default here, but of course we can go and check which local authorities we want to include. And a useful little tip here is that you can click on these headers for inner and outer London, and they'll just select all of the local authorities in that section. So we can select all the local authorities for inner London, and we'll get the visualization to update. And if we wanted to, we could also include the London value and the England value, which is by picking those from this side panel. And then it'll bring those values into the chart as well. And here we can see again that although some of the lower performing in relative terms London local authorities are listed here, they're all still kind of well above that England comparator, which is something you probably would have picked out from your local overview as well. Again, we can hide the labels if we want to, if we're just trying to make a visualization that we want to sort of put into a separate report, for example. But perhaps what you want to do is look at the performance over time a little bit here as well. And so hopefully we've got you covered on that. We've got a line chart available. So this is showing us all of the years of data for the destinations data. As Steve said, there's many indicators go back a really long way. The destinations measures, as we know, do go back quite a long way. It's just that the DfE changed the definition of them around this point of the 2016 data. So what we've done is truncated off the preceding data as not being entirely comparable. But many other measures that are on Intelligent London would go back even further if you're interested. And we can see that here how the trends of London local authorities have compared to the overall England trend here as well. So the England values are along the bottom. Again, we can choose to hide the labels if we think that's getting a little bit busy for our purposes for our chart, and we can change the local authorities and the regions that we include. So we can pick other local authorities in Outer London. We can choose to show other regions as well if we wish to, or we can choose to show or hide the England value. One other useful thing we can do with this page is we can look at a chart of ranks instead. This is what some people refer to as a bump chart, which is really showing the change in ranks over time. And so this is showing us how London local authorities compare to each other, to the 33 London local authorities, or 32 plus city, over the time that we have available in the system. So lots of flexibility in terms of creating your own visualizations from this and kind of analysing the data in a little bit more detail. As Steve was saying, if you're trying to compare, understand what's happening in neighbouring boroughs, understanding how provision has changed and those sorts of things, it's a really useful feature. Last of all, if you want to basically produce your own visualizations or produce your own analysis on this, we've got some data in the table too. So the very last section of this website is the table at the bottom, and this includes all of the data that we have behind the website. So again, we can use the table on the website if we want to, and we can sort the data. So we can sort the data on any of the years or alphabetically. And down here in the bottom corner, we've got an export function. So if what you really want to do is get the data out and produce some piece of custom analysis for yourselves, then you can do that from the system. You can get the data out of the system, right? Which is a very useful thing. Last, but certainly by no means least for people in terms of understanding the data, is the footnotes and data sources. So we pull out the key footnotes from the information that the DfE produce on these pieces of data, and again, the other thing, we're linking straight back to where we got this data from. So if you need to go and look at the actual source for some reason, if you need like more information, if you want to dig into it, maybe understand some of those footnotes in a bit more detail, you can go straight to the actual source on the government website where we got this data from. So that's a really useful thing, just in terms of understanding, the sort of caveats behind the information in a little bit more detail. One other thing I'll just show is if I click the button to go back up to sort of my list of measures at the top, is that we can search the directory here. So we can search for things like absence, for example. We just type in the word absence and we'll get the indicators that relate to absence will come up, and we can click on these, and then the visualizations underneath will update. Or I don't know, let's say we're looking for something to do with 9 to 4 or 9 to 5. We can find that relatively easily through the search feature on the website as well. So you don't have to necessarily go pouring through the details of all of these categories and these selections of indicators to find what you're looking for. So very quick overview of Borough Insight there. As with the previous section on the local overviews, we've got the option of taking a look at this yourself. So hopefully you were already on the website, and you can click across to the next piece of the website, which would have been your Borough Insight. We've come up with some possible suggestions of things that you could have a look at here. Again, some of you will be from local authorities, some of you might be from the GLA, some of you will have interests in working with local authorities. There are some suggestions on this slide about some things you could take a look at. As before, I'm going to give you say 5 minutes or so to have a little play around with the website yourself, have a little explore of some of the data. Again, we're happy to field some questions in the chat, or pick up anything that anyone really wants to chat about, and then I'll proceed looking at some of the other tools afterwards. So perhaps another 30 seconds or so on that. I can see Steve's been picking up questions on the chat, so I'll leave him to that. Right, if everyone's happy, I'm going to move on to the next piece. store up any other questions. Obviously, you can ask any other questions in the chat, and anyone who's got any thoughts on feedback, as Steve said, we'll come to that right at the end of the session, so that's no problem. So the next piece of the journey, we've talked a lot about data at the local authority level already. So we looked at the local overview and the Borough Insight, which is all at local authority level. Now, one of the next questions that people would have is, okay, but tell me a little bit about how that's made up by the providers that exist in London, schools, colleges, and those sorts of things. And the last two blobs are really around that. The first one, the learning landscape, is some context largely. So this is to help you understand what things look like in London in terms of provision, and what they look like in your local areas as well. So again, a bit of flexibility here, a tool that you can explore and play around with. It's not just a static piece of analysis, but what we've got hopefully recognisably on the screen is, maybe I can zoom it in a little bit actually, that might help. There we go, maybe that might help, is a map of London. I'm sure you'll recognise it, just about see the M25 there going around the outside. And what we're doing here is plotting data from essentially what used to be called Edubase is now called Get Information About Schools from the DFE, and we're plotting it on a map so you can kind of see what it looks like in your local area. Some things you can do here as well. So we've got some options across the top, but again, we can look at certain types of provision. So if we click on, at the moment, we've got this map coloured by broad types of provision, as we can see here, type of provider. And if we click on anything on the right hand side, it'll highlight those sections for us. So we can see that there are apparently areas in London where there are fewer colleges. We kind of know a bit about that from our trajectories report anyway, and we do know also that there are some colleges that won't be plotted on here because they are sister sites of like other headquartered areas, but it gives you a bit of information about where there could be gaps in provision. So we can do that. We can also filter this for just particular local authorities. So we've been focusing on Wandsworth a little bit. Steve and I work a little bit there as well. So we can filter just for providers that are in Wandsworth. And now we've got a zoomed in map that just shows the areas around Wandsworth. It's a little bit hard to use, so we can make the dots a little bit bigger so we can kind of see what those things are. And what we can do is we can hover over these dots to get a little bit of extra information about all of these providers. So again, this is information in the public domain, in the Edubase database that we're just making available more easily for you across London. And there are a couple of options in the tooltip here where you can click through to see Ofsted reports for given providers, assuming they exist on the Ofsted website. And you can click to see performance table data, by which we mean performance table data the last time it was published, which of course at the moment is 2019, but those links still take you straight there if you need them. So we can see a map of what the provision in the area looks like around Wandsworth, but we can also get a little bit more detail about what types of providers we've got here by changing this drop down at the top. So we can colour these by a more detailed cut of providers, which you can see enables us to split out things like academy specials, academy converters, and the types of independent schools that are available here. And again, clicking on any of these on the right hand side allows us to focus on those types of institutions specifically, so we can get a view on what's going on there. Now, of course, if I'm working in Wandsworth, I might also be interested in, for example, what a neighbouring borough has in terms of provision. So I might wish to select Merton as an option as well, and then I can start to look at where the provision of, for example, my residents in Wandsworth, who might go over the border into Merton, what sort of provision they might be able to access if they were to do that. And what we can see a little bit here in terms of the sort of area between the south Wandsworth and kind of northeast Merton is that there does look to be like a little bit of a gap here in terms of possible provision for secondary. Now, if you know the area like I do, you'll know that the Harris is actually moving a little bit, so it'll be moving the headquarters to over here, I believe. But notwithstanding that's possibly part of the reason for them to be doing that is to sort of access young people from this area of the map here. So lots of power and flexibility to play around with this for your own needs. And when you do, and when you've got something that is useful and you might need, there's an option in this little bar across the bottom, this little screen down option where you can download something. So you can download it as an image, or you can download a PDF of this piece, or the PowerPoint presentation just of this little section here if you need again to use this, or you can just screen capture it yourself if you need to use it in your own reports, for example. So really, this one's about understanding what the provision looks like in your local area, understanding what who might be able to access it, whether there are any gaps or anything like that. So hopefully that makes sense for people. Once again, that one's a little bit more straightforward, but I'm going to put up this slide, which gives you some ideas about things that you could do yourself with regard to the learning landscape. So again, you've got your computers in front of you, so you can hopefully access the learning landscape blob on Intelligent London and take a look at what the provision looks like in an area that you're working in or an area you're familiar with, understand what types of provision are available and where there could possibly be gaps in provision. You might be able to understand some of the more detail about some of those providers by clicking through to their Ofsted reports where they're available, or generating a little image that you might then put in a slide deck of some sort of your own use. So I'll give you a few minutes to take a look at that, and again I'll hopefully be picking up some questions in the chat, which sort of looks like Steve has hopefully been doing. Give you a few minutes on that, and any questions happy to field. So maybe another 30 seconds or so on that, and then I'll move us along if that's okay. Okie doke. Right, let me see if I can get back to where I was. Right, so we've taken a look at the learning landscape. The last blob on our journey through the data of Intelligent London is provider performance. Steve's already touched on this. We all know there has been less data published at the school level by the DfE in the last 2 years. Understandably so. Some data has still been published though, so it's kind of important that we pick up on that. But in a normal time frame, what you might be interested in, particularly after having come from somewhere like Borough Insight on the tool, is to understand how a given measure on Borough Insight is made up by its constituent parts by the schools and providers in that local authority. So you might be able to see and understand how some trends in that data are being reflected from the information that is coming directly from the schools. So again, if we try and load this up, hopefully it's a wee bit zoomed in to start with. Right, this one doesn't show you anything to start with, because again, it's like your sort of chart builder tool. So you might have come from, as I say, Borough Insight with some questions, and you might say, now I want to look at my destinations data in a little bit more detail. So the first thing it's trying to ask me to do across the top here is to select some things in order for us to show you some data. So select an indicator. Whoa, okay, so there's quite a few things in this list. We've got a lot of information from the census data to start with. We've got our Key Stage 4 destinations and Key Stage 5 destinations, and these first three things here, census, Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5, well, those are still being updated at the moment by the DfE, so we've still got more up-to-date information on those because it is still being published at the school level. The various statistical releases that the DfE do, those still exist. And then further down on the scroll here, we've got Key Stage 4 data, Attainment 8, Progress 8, some of this by disadvantaged young people as well. And similarly for Key Stage 5, we've got all the sort of standard APS information. And then at the bottom, we've got all the completion and retention information. So those are the measures that the DfE calculates kind of longitudinally a little bit after when the usual performance table data comes out. So as Steve says, once we get back to, I don't know, some sort of normality, maybe we'll be updating those things again. But for the time being, let's take a quick look at some destinations data. So I'll pick let's pick Key Stage 4 destinations this time. Well, still nothing's happened. A little bit unsatisfactory, but it's because we need to pick a local authority that we're interested in. So again, a local authority from the second option, and we'll choose Wandsworth. Now, last of all, we default this to sort of the most available data, the most recent year of data. But in this case, the destinations measures are tagged as an earlier year by the DfE. So we need to go back and select 2019 from the providers. Right. Now we've got a chart. Now we've got a visualization. So this is kind of where we were trying to get to. And we can see it's all the schools in Wandsworth, schools and providers in Wandsworth, and it's giving us information about this particular measure, Key Stage 4 destinations. So it's the overall destinations measure, staying on in education or employment, and we can see the information on the tooltips being coloured here as well, and we've also got the national comparator here. So if we hover over this, we can see the national data on the side as well. We've still got some extra options, so we can choose to add in some other providers here. So we can take a look at, because this is data on destinations, we can take a look at the data for the special schools as well. So we can see some really good destinations here for some of the special schools in Wandsworth. Good to see. And again, we can export this information in the form of an image or a PDF. For those of you who don't know, there is a tool in Windows, the snipping tool, which is this one here. Hopefully, if I bring it over here, you'll be able to see it. So this is often what people will use to take a little screenshot of a piece of analysis that they want to do. So you can find this on your start menu in Windows. And if you just take a new snip, it's going to get in my way. But I could, for example, do that, and then I've got a little screenshot just of that piece of analysis, that visualization there, which I could then transfer over into another report of some sort if I was writing a report or a business case or something like that for my local authority. Export that data from the website. Again, at the bottom, I should have said this on the learning landscape as well, but at the bottom, we're really clear about where this data's come from. So, we're downloading data that the DfE published on the performance tables website, and we're representing it for you. We're making it more easy to access. A lot of these data are big Excel tables. Yolan's already told us that there'll be people here, including probably ourselves, who are really happy looking at data in Excel. But we also want to be able to see messages and trends in that data really quickly, and we want to be able to do that by looking at charts and visualizations. And that's really where a lot of what Intelligent London is about. It's about simplifying the journey to access that data, and making sure that you can do it without needing an analyst or some data analysis resource in your local authority or your organization to be able to sit there and help you out. And hopefully that makes some sense there. As before, we're going to let you have a quick play around with this yourself. I appreciate that the data, some of the data in this is a little bit more out of date because of the situation with the performance tables. But there are things that you can explore. Oh, sorry, I should have also said, maybe I should go back to that. See, with this, we could look back at the destinations data for earlier years, and if we change that, we just get the data to update for preceding years as well, so we can make sure that we can go through and see what else is available there as well. But if I go back to my presentation slide, give you a few minutes to take a look at this yourselves, have a little play around with it, see if you can find out something interesting about a local authority you work with or a local authority that you're familiar with, find out something you didn't already know. Let us know if you've got any questions. Maybe another minute or so on this one. Fortunately for me, that was my wife bringing me a cup of tea, so I am extremely happy about that. Right, going to wrap it up on Borough Insight there. I know Steve's been picking up some questions in the chat, which has been really great. Really appreciated that. So what we've hopefully done for you. Sorry, muted. had a good explore of the principal parts of Intelligent London, the 4 tools that are available. We've shown you how they could be used, how you might take a journey through them, how they knit together, and how they will give you the information sort of at your fingertips to kind of understand what's going on with your provision a little bit more, and how we're trying to draw things together into one place. You know, if that's one of the key messages, I know Jolyn spoke about it earlier, you know, making it easy for you to do something that was previously spread across lots of places, and trying to curate what's going on there. Feedback and questions. Now, we'd love your feedback. I'm going to bring all of these up. There. You know, this has been a bit of a hands-on session and a bit of a chance for you to look at Intelligent London, perhaps in a way that you hadn't before. There's been some great questions, and that's awesome. A few things we can take back, speak to Jolyn about as well, in terms of what you in local authorities are looking to do with the system. There's a few prompts here on screen about things that you might think about, but this is by no means exhaustive. If there's anything that you found tricky, hard to do, didn't quite get, be brilliant if you could bring any of those things up, and you don't have to talk about it right now. You know, we're happy to pick up questions via email or in any other feedback that comes in, but if anyone would like to say anything, you could use the hands up, or you could use the chat, and we could maybe have a little bit of a talk about that. Jolyn, any other thoughts on the progress through the site?
Lovely, thank you both Steve and Phil so much for that very eloquent demonstration of Intelligent London. Just while you're gathering your thoughts around ideas and questions, we really do want to get your feedback on, you know, are there other things that we can do with the site? I'm just going to put the elephant in the room out there. Yes, it has resource consequences, but we work with partners. Partners use this, and that's where we can actually maybe have some different conversations about potentially adding new features, doing some work with other people as well. But really, it would be helpful to hone in on how does this tool help you? How does it make your job easier? That is a critical thing that we are kind of after. I think we've got a hand up here from Josephine.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to double check, so I was putting it in the chat for easy to ask, about the FE providers, because I know that they have several campuses. Because I'm from Southwark, so we merged with Lewisham College, but it doesn't actually show up. So say if I wanted to share this with another member of staff, it doesn't show up. So would that be possible to add the FEs or the different campuses? I'm not sure who would be in charge of that.
There's actually been a little bit of conversation in the chat between Mary Vine Morris, Phil and myself about, is there a way that we can get, rather than just the headquarter sites, which would sit in the data set that Phil mentioned, can we actually get the major sites in there? So we're going to go away and have a chat about that, look at the feasibility of doing that. It's more about making sure that we can consistently get the data, but it is something that we will look at.
Yeah, so I missed that. Yes, it'd be nice to just have the data of what's happening in FE if possible. Yeah. But it's really easy to use. So yeah, good feedback. Yeah, it's good.
Brilliant.
I think that point about headquarter sites of colleges is really important. And as Jolyn said, we had a little exchange with Mary about it. It'd be really great if we could add that as a feature to the website. We know that it's a thing that has been happening increasingly over the last few years as colleges have merged, and it would be brilliant to be able to have that resource available for people to use. So yeah, certainly looking to explore that. Jolyn, I know the other thing that I was talking with your colleague Peter about previously was, another thing which would be really great to hear from people, now or at a later date, is any other uses that they've made of the website. So have you used it to kind of help write any other business cases in your local authority? And if we can maybe share some of those stories that people have amongst the group, maybe there are other things that people could know that they would be able to use Intelligent London for if the need arises. So that'd be another thing which we'd love to pick up from people.
Claire's popped a question in the chat about the data sources. Have all the data sources been taken from publicly available data, or have they been collected from LAs individually? This is all publicly available data sources, Claire.
And that's for the comparability point that my colleague Steve was talking about earlier. We just need to, we'd love to add some extra things, and this college data sites might be an interesting example of where we're able to try and hook into some other data, but we want it to be consistent. Good question from Mary. Love that question. Have you had to change anything as a result of the post-16 trajectories work? I'd say the one thing I can say we've definitely done since then is add some extra information on disadvantaged. So where before, and that is also partly because the DfE have started publishing a bit more information on disadvantage. But when we see stuff like that coming out and we look at how the trajectories of young people will vary depending on their circumstances, it feels really important to push that into the sphere of what Intelligent London knows about. And I think I mentioned earlier about there was a little blog piece on our website about destinations of disadvantaged people, which is again is based on that public data. I imagine I'll probably check this maybe, but I imagine there's a tool on there, probably another Tableau tool where you can explore the local authority data in a little bit more detail, and you might be able to sort of drill down through a couple of those sort of layers of other things that the DfE publish.
It's probably also worth noting that the team at MIME pushed back a little with the department recently over some changes to how they publish level 2 at 19. And because of the change that they made, it was actually harder for us to continue to get that sense of trajectories. So with that pushing from MIME, the department actually went back to publishing level 2 at 19 in a way that made it easier for us to do our trajectories work. So that was a really good intervention. Thank you, Steve, for that.
In the specifics of that are that we put in a freedom of information request, and because it's something that the department previously published and therefore we knew they could calculate relatively easily, they decided that they would. I mean, the specifics are that it was a measure that they have essentially removed from the Key Stage 4 performance tables, and we understand and respect that. But I think that there is a significant difference between something existing at the end of Key Stage 4 and something existing by the end of 19. And young people through their journey post 16 are expected to still be getting some of these skills, in particular, completing their level 2 and completing their English and maths if they don't have it, and not being able to measure that was actually a significant disadvantage for us. So we felt we should ask for that data, and the department agreed and published it, onto as part of the normal the statistics. So it's great to be able to kind of do stuff like that with the support of local, London local authorities who say and who we know would be able to make use of that data.
Just to sort of add to that, I think it's really interesting that we know obviously there's loads of scrutiny over Key Stage 4, EBAC, Attainment 8, Progress 8, and at Key Stage 5 it tends to be more around the kind of average point score measures, because those are the ones that schools are held accountable for. But actually to us, when we were looking at what does this really mean for employability, so if you think about the Key Stage 5 performance measures, in schools they only look at the level 3 cohort. Really, there are some level 2 measures now, but it's very focused on the level 3 cohort, the cohort that are already doing A levels. And we just feel actually, if you're really trying to get an understanding of to what extent are our schools and our education systems preparing young people for the next level, it is that level 2 by 19 and level 3 by 19 that is actually really powerful. And actually London performs well on that measure. It doesn't look quite as good on the average point score measure, but it is partly a quirk of the way that data is calculated, which, as I mentioned before, we go into in a lot of quite technical detail in the post-16 trajectories report.
Couple of interesting comments in the chat. So Joe's mentioned more information about destinations and progression. Some of you might be aware of the longitudinal survey of education outcomes data set, which is still in lots of ways quite new. That's got some very interesting work in it, but that definitely that is almost a bit of data that starts to glue together some of what we can see about young people and then some of what we start to see about young people and entering the labour market. That would be fascinating, fabulous to do, but quite the ask from a kind of investment perspective. Also, Darren's mentioned, would there be any value to looking at how we could potentially include the SFA course directory? I think that's possibly something slightly different. If you pop through the chat, Darren, you'll see that I've mentioned a sister site that we worked with MIME on some time ago called Skills Match, where we actually tried to do a little bit of what you've suggested there. In terms of looking at young people's qualifications, the adult education that was available and the needs in the labour market. Again, all of these things are feasible, but we'd need to think about why we want to do it, what we want to get out of it, and particularly from, I think, from the perspective of actually Intelligent London, helping to make sure that we're providing more progression opportunities for young people.
Although, just to pick up on that briefly, Yoland, I think Darren's point is also, so there's two parts obviously to the course directory. Is there's the sort of full detail of the offer, but there is also some information about locations of that offer, so we could theoretically extract the locations from that directory without sort of processing the whole thing as a kind of, as you say, there are places that do that already, and there are government portals that present that data, so we don't need to do that, but we might be able to extract some information on some other locations from it, which is worth considering. Yeah, definitely. And then the other point I was just going to make is that on the longitudinal educational outcomes, the LEO data, the DfE is publishing a lot of research on that. Steve, I think we've got a location where there's a bunch of it's collected together, which we might be able to share with people who might find it interesting. The other thing is that the DfE, via their association with the ONS, are now allowing researchers some access to the LEO data set. So it is the sort of thing where you can put in specific requests for things that you would like to be able to do with the LEO dataset, and that can include publishing some of your findings. Obviously, you just have to kind of adhere to their new sort of their very sort of GDPR data security orientated 5 safes approach, which is essentially the thing that we did for the post-16 trajectories report, where we kind of accessed that data securely with the department. But I think it's a useful thing. That's a good point my colleague Steve's just made in the chat, is not too much of that is really focused on local authorities at the moment. It's really like big picture, what's happening to young people as they travel through both the post-16 sort of arena, but also not considering education as an end in itself, and what it means for their life chances beyond that point.
Lots of food for thought. There is quite a bit actually in the chat, really helpfully, that we want to follow up on. So I'll be doing a wash up probably next week with Steve and Phil to look at some of the things that we genuinely do want to follow up on, which we will do. Some useful ideas and some things that we can have a go at fixing. I think particularly the issue around college sites, and as Phil said earlier, I think that gives us an opportunity to test out a non-national data set and how that might work in the current configuration. And obviously we'll be looking forward to working with Mary on that. There's some other useful ideas here in terms of also from Joe, making sure that we're doing promotion of the site through the directors of education. How can we help some of the teams in the local authorities, particularly the data teams, feel like they've got a bit more ownership of the site, hopefully, so they don't see it as competition. And that was never ever the intention. We actually worked closely with colleagues in boroughs who were data analysts, and part of its kind of raison d'etre was to help them too. So there's definitely lots that we can follow up on here as well. Please do make sure you jot down the info@mimeconsulting.co.uk email address. Peter's also popped into the chat that if you've got any further reflections on the session, that you can drop him an email as well. Particularly with, it's such a rich data tool. I think inevitably you're going to go away, maybe pop back at it and then have some other ideas. So we recognise that you're not going to necessarily come back to us now with all of your ideas, but keep feeding them through, because we do want to make sure this is something that really does work for you. And, Steve, Phil, anything you want to add?
I was just going to say, we're obviously via Peter or Anna will get the slides for the session sent out to people, and we'll work with you guys in terms of distributing the recording if there are other people who are interested in seeing it.
Brilliant. The questions have slowed down. End times for sessions are limits, not targets. So I know that we're all extremely busy. Can I just say particular thank you to Steve and Phil for such a brilliant presentation. I'd also like to